Labor MP Ed Husic. Ed Husic, thanks very much for your time. Might start on the news of the day, the PM's speech outlining, well, a few things, including environmental approvals in the PM sites. He's not saying he'll change the rules, but fast-track the process. Nothing wrong with that, is there?
So what exactly are they going to do? I mean, they have, in the absence of being able to demonstrate what type of agenda they're going to do as a government, they've come up with countless reviews. And now, when they're in a jam and they want to demonstrate that they're doing something, they say they're going to fight red tape, which they always campaign on. Remember, previous coalition governments in the last few years have pointed out how they'd take the scissors to red tape. And now we're back at it again because it's an excuse for action. And at a time, I've got to ask, when the coalition's environmental credentials are being brought into question on a range of measures, they are saying that they would potentially water down environmental regulations built up over time without explaining what that will do from an environmental perspective, and at a time when people are wondering, well, what are the regulations around the way we use water, the way we build homes or facilities near bushfire-prone areas? What does that mean in terms of large-scale development and the impacts that it might have on those two scores? So a lot of questions unanswered in the rush for a quick headline.
So, yeah, we do need the detail and we'll have to pore over that. But the principle that they are outlining, that at the moment you have to submit the same information if you are a developer of some sort, again and again to different bodies, state, federal and so on, there was one example of a Tasmanian company wanting to export, had to go to Melbourne to get the hard copy of the form. I mean, that obviously seems like madness, doesn't it?
If there are things that states should do better, then they should definitely be facing a signal or have a spotlight put on them as to why that happens. But instead of the federal government lecturing about others having to go through countless episodes of red tape, what about the Australian members of the public who engage with federal government services, who are forced time and again to fill in paperwork because the federal government hasn't got its act together? I met recently with a wife of a veteran who says that for medical assistance they have to fill out the same paperwork that they had filled out previously just to update what they're doing with government. The government is good at lecturing others on red tape and bureaucratic hurdles, yet in their own environment where they're supposed to do things easier, be it on Centrelink or in this case Veterans Affairs, they're not doing the right thing. So get your own house in order before you lecture others.
Or do both.
Exactly. You should. I do love your commitment to multitasking. I'm very supportive of it, Tom.
All right. We should talk about water restrictions, actually. So I guess you'll be facing them, I assume. No more hosing off the Commodore on the driveway, Ed Husic, or whatever your car make of choice is. What do you make of this? The solution for Australia has always been either get more water, get more dams, or desalination, which has been a bit demonised in the past few years? Well,
the government at the federal and state levels had recently been talking up the need to build more dams. It's going to be interesting that we're building more dams at a time where we're not getting enough rain. And while it should be, we should obviously support the building of dams. The coalition's talked up the need to build dams for 6 years and built none. Maybe the other thing that they could consider doing is, you heard in the interviews earlier, there are questions being raised about desalination capacity, and at the same time we're trying to consider what can be done to bring forward infrastructure investment to help the economy now. I think you could kill two birds with one stone if the federal government was willing to partner with the state on examining expanded desalination capacity in states that have got concerns about water shortages, and bring forward the spending now to not only help the economy at a point where it needs that investment, but also deal with water requirements by states like New South Wales that are going into further water restrictions because they're worried about the decrease in dam levels.
Is there a danger it's a bit knee-jerk? I mean, we had a big desal reaction a few years ago and a lot of them ended up mothballed, not being used. We know they're more expensive and they're energy hungry as well. Do we need to be strategic about this rather than, I mean, are you saying one would be needed and operational in any particular part of the country?
Well, I think the public debate has definitely moved on. I dare say that there's a lot more willingness to consider desal, particularly in other parts of the world where it's been generated more efficiently, particularly in parts of the Middle East where they have to consider this a lot more carefully given the conditions that they're forced to live with in terms of climate. So I think there's been a change in the public sentiment around this, but also, dare I say, with renewables and other forms of energy generation becoming a lot more readily available, being able to team up there in terms of trying to provide support for the energy required to run the desal plants won't be a solution all in itself, but is part of the answer. I think the days are different in terms of considering this. But again, if we're thinking about, Tom, fast-tracking infrastructure investment, making money available, doing it in ways that matter, the federal government should consider partnering with the state government in potentially expanding desal capacity for states that are facing massive water restrictions because of this huge drought that we're going through.
All right, well, we'll see if that's another potential option on the table as we look at, obviously, the drought situation not going away for now. A focus on the China-Australia relationship this week after the trip of Australian MPs was cancelled by China, definitely taking offence from what they had to say about the Chinese Communist Party in particular. Do you agree with the broad consensus here, an own goal for the Chinese?
I have to say, from a contrarian point of view, I would like to make this observation, if I might. Andrew Hastie likened China to Nazi Germany. And then he wonders why he and James Patterson aren't getting a welcome mat or having the red carpet laid out to them to visit China. And then people will say, oh, well, this isn't really a case of China respecting the human right of freedom of speech and being able to express your views. But I'd also make this point. The Liberal Party for quite some time has been at the forefront of saying that we should not manage our relationship with China primarily at the starting point through a human rights prism. Well, is it that we only care about human rights when the human rights of two Liberal MPs have been affected by China, when really as a nation we have watered down looking at those issues and arguing on those issues because we said the relationship has to be broader than that? And I think, from my own perspective, we do need to put a focus on human rights in China for also the people living inside China as well as those who want to visit too. And I think there's been a bit of a contradiction that's been missing in this debate.
What would you say then? To what extent should we be speaking about, for example, the Uyghurs and other Muslim majorities, the concentration camps? How far should the government be going? What's your comment on what China's doing with the Uyghur Muslims?
Well, I just want to make the point that human rights are important for as much as for people living inside China, as opposed to, as well, Liberal MPs wanting to visit China and be able to make their views. China is now a world power, and it is great to see that in terms of transforming their economy, they've been able to do what they've been able to achieve. The economic prosperity that has now benefited so many Chinese people, and they are absolutely right to be proud of how strong they've become. But I, for one, do not neglect the fact that China has been able to grow in economic stature because they have a political system where they can make decisions in ways that most Western market-based economies and countries could not do. And human rights is a fundamental part of that and do play a big role in the way in which market economies operate. They have a very important role to play. Now, it is absolutely crucial that we raise human rights in the context of China. But again, I just could not help but notice in the furor that was whipped up in the last week about Andrew Hastie and James Patterson not being able to visit, that it seems to be us looking at human rights in a very narrow frame right now, as opposed to, I think, the much more serious discussion about this with respect to China, and we should have that discussion.
I think a lot would agree in terms of the seriousness of what's happening, human rights in the Xinjiang province. So
yes.
What are you saying specifically, that the government has not gone far enough in condemnation of what's happening there?
No, I don't think that they have, and I think they've deliberately done it because, again, they've been conditioned over many years from John Howard onwards of saying, well, we shouldn't be just talking to the Chinese in relation to human rights issues. And I think it's important that those discussions be had, and it's when you get to the point that we have in the last week, I just am left scratching, as many I suspect would, but haven't necessarily said. I just go ahead and say it. But I've been left scratching my head looking at the reaction to 2 people being stopped from visiting our shores on the basis of what was said.
Okay. Is it still entirely appropriate to treat the trading relationship with China totally separately, the way we do?
I don't think in this day and age, with the complexity of relationships, you can just cordon off some discussions and have others on the basis, we've got to be able to talk through those issues and have those discussions. As I said, we can all be in awe of how China has grown, and it is a world power, and it does a lot of good things as well, and it is making huge breakthroughs in various areas, particularly in terms of things that I'm deeply interested in with respect to tech. But having said that, we get, as a nation, as Australia, we get criticisms from others about some of the policies that we decide upon as a nation. We live with it. China needs to recognise in this day and age that it will have criticisms made of itself as well. This is just part and parcel of being on the world stage, and in China's case, being a major player on the world stage. You just got to accept that people will make those observations.
All right, interesting contribution on the China discussion this week. We need to get a fire update, so I'll have to leave it there. Ed Husic, thanks for your time.
Thank you.